Welcome once again to the Get Off Your Sugar Summit. My name is Robert Scott Bell, host of the Robert Scott Bell Radio Show, available 2 hours a day, 6 days a week through Natural News Radio and many other outlets. Just go to robertscottbell.com. I am honored to be co-hosting this event with my good buddy, Dr. Daryl Joffrey. Get Off Your Sugar. Very, very passionate about this subject. And we have an incredible guest today to go deep into the places where not many medical doctors or physicians go, although more are now coming on board. This man is a hero to the microbiome, to your microbiome, our microbiome, and the microbiome of planet Earth. He's amazing. Dr. Zach Bush, he's a physician, and of course, he's been a specialist within internal medicine, endocrinology, and hospice care, internationally recognized educator of the microbiome as it relates to health, disease, and our food production systems. Dr. Bush is also founder of Seraphic Group. I hope I said that right. Seraphic or Seraphic, we'll find out in a moment, to develop root cause solutions for human and ecological health and extend his passion for educating the global community about topics such as the state of our soil, including the need to eradicate toxins such as glyphosate from our farming chain, and the importance of gut-brain communication as a vital part of our overall health and well-being. You'll find out more about Dr. Zach Bush at zachbushmd.com. Dr. Bush, again, amazing, great to have you on board. It was so good to see you recently at another event, and you continue to amaze me and astound me how deep you're going in terms of not just this subject of getting off your sugar, which is important, but backing up to the big, big picture, how our microbiome reflects the microbiome of the planet we are on. So thank you for being here, and let her rip, my friend.
Wonderful to be with you and the audience. It was really thrilling to be on this subject. I think that it's fascinating to see how human biology has changed so dramatically in the last few decades, and in few areas more so than this area of sugar consumption and its impact that it's had on our microbiome and human physiology at large.
So if we go to kind of a narrow cast for a moment, because again, the microbiome is something that is being explored extensively now. Every day there's more research being published, and you're part of that, getting the word out. But sugar addiction, refined sugar, I look back historically throughout the history of our ancestry. It wasn't until, I don't know, maybe a few hundred years ago where the wealthy elite, the aristocracy, maybe in Europe particularly, really started refining food and finding, wow, we can get the sweet stuff. This is amazing. And it sent us on an altered downward spiral long before we knew anything about the microbiome, unless we acknowledged the role of the lost teachings of Antoine Béchamp and the law of the terrain. So there's some parallel tracks that we abandoned along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that as we look at that processed food industry, sugar kind of led the charge along with refined wheat products at the end of the 1800s, as we went to steel grinding instead of stone grinding our wheat. And we started getting these super refined products that were lacking any of the fiber content within these, native and natural heirloom grains that we had long consumed. And so to see those grains stripped of their fiber meant that we were changing the glycemic index of these foods, and suddenly foods that were healthy, complex carbohydrates were becoming, sugar sources that were leading, this rapid increase in cardiovascular disease over what would become the 20th century.
Would you say that we had, to some degree, adapted to new ways of eating in the thousands of years transition from hunter-gathering to agriculture and farming? Because you also mentioned, again, it wasn't just the farming, but it's what we did to the food that we farmed. Like I said, the refining process that I've said, we refined the minerals out, and in a 20th and 21st century context, we added toxic poisons to that food to compound the initial mistake of refining the minerals out.
They're lost a lot of the traditional approaches to crop production, things like soil health, around composting, fallow years where you gave a plot of soil true rest, cover cropping, all of these techniques that have been age old got kind of abandoned in the interest of scaling to size and productivity. And it was kind of the greed of the short term that created that dust bowl of the 1930s, where we were literally burying the Midwest in dust from dead topsoils throughout the Midwest as we completely destroyed the grasslands that were native to the United States for millions of years before our presence. And so in the decimation of that ecology, we went into a full-blown starvation state in the United States. And that's hard for anybody today to really wrap their head around. That as recent as the 1940s, we had soup lines and we're dealing with large-scale poverty and starvation throughout West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and much of the South. And it's hard for us to imagine in the food overabundance state that many of us now face, that it was that recent of an event. And interestingly, if we look at the last few years, we're starting to recreate that whole phenomenon again through an increase in the dependence on large-scale herbicide and pesticide management that's really scaled up since 1996. We have further decimated soil ecology, beyond anything in history, and we now have the largest dust bowl going in the history of mankind. We are losing about 2 tons of topsoil off of every acre of farmland in the United States as we devastate that. And that that parallels, I think, this glycemic index, this sugar phenomenon, where as we destroy soil through genetically modified crop usage that is genetically engineered to be Roundup ready, we are deleting out the nutrient density of food. And what you're left with is high carbohydrate content. And interestingly, it's also what leads to a rise in global CO2, atmospheric CO2 content, and the global warming phenomenon. Interestingly, as CO2 goes up in the atmosphere, the sugar content in our food goes up. And so we have this bizarre relationship between death of the soil, loss of the lungs of the planet. Planet Earth can't breathe, CO2 accumulates. The plants bring more of that CO2 in, convert that to sugar. And so we're increasing the glycemic index, if you will, of all foods on the planet through this disruption of soil ecology.
So I guess we call it the sugar highs that exist from food that is refined, even as we look to sugars in a sense in the body for a source of energy, although that would be a normal breakdown or a storage let's say released from storage in a sense. It's different when it's this instant sugar rush that's coming in. And in absence of these minerals, and I've talked about particularly what I've researched in terms of the chromium molecule, I hear a lot about insulin resistance, and I say, are we really resistant to insulin, or can we not offload the sugar from the insulin because we don't have chromium, for instance, as an accompanying mineral to allow for certain metabolic activities to occur, functional activities. Again, coming back to mineral deficiencies being key to solve the sugar addiction problem.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can imagine as nutrient density goes down, the body, the microbiome, as well as the human biology, is seeking these minerals and nutrients for healthy biology to happen. And when the content of this goes down within the food, the body is then compelled to eat more food. And so we have this phenomenon where we're eating more caloric content for less nutrient return as we decimate the soil quality. And interestingly, Roundup, as kind of public enemy number one, in my opinion, this chemical was initially developed by Monsanto as a pipe cleaner for large-scale commercial sewer pipes to clean the mineral deposits out of the sewer lines to keep them from clogging. And so it's a very potent chelator, so it would rip the minerals off the surface of the pipe and open up pipes, which is, they thought a great approach, but it turned out the content, the amount of glyphosate they needed to achieve that, as soon as the dilutant would come out the other end of the pipe, it would kill everything in the pond behind it, and they realized that it was too decimating to the ecology. So they rebranded it and redeveloped a marketplace as far as a weed killer. And I don't think they even anticipated their own success, because in 1976, when they really took this to market in full force as a weed killer, they didn't foresee the opportunity that by 1996, they would genetically modify corn, soybean, and now more than 30 other crops to be Roundup ready, meaning that we could spray our crops directly with this chemical. And so I don't think they even anticipated their own success. Now we're pouring over 4.5 billion pounds of this chemical into the soils of the planet a year. that volume is really hard to wrap your head around. 4.5 billion pounds of any toxin seems like a bad idea. But when that toxin is a primary antibiotic to the bacteria and fungi, parasites in the soil, a single application of Roundup can kill as much as 100% of the top dwelling earthworms and 50% of the deep dwelling earthworms within a farm field. And so from the microbiology all the way to that macro life of the earthworm, we're decimating life with even single applications. But as you know, in a typical year, you're looking at 3 to 4 widespread applications of this chemical. And in that, not only killing the microbiome, but also functioning now as that potent chelator to grab those critical minerals, like you mentioned earlier, from our food. So we're growing food that's now nutrient deplete, that is microbiome deficient in its intelligence, meaning that the microbiology of the soil didn't have an opportunity to make biodiverse or bioavailable the nutrients to those plants. We have that paucity. Then, unfortunately, those chemicals are born to us in the food and water systems. So everything from drinking water to the air we breathe to the rain that falls in the United States, measurements have shown as much as 75% contaminated with Roundup. And so when it's raining Roundup, when we're breathing Roundup, we have that same ecologic damage within our bodies to our microbiome. So we're having this antibiotic effect to life right now, given the amount of this Roundup in our ecosystem. Its downstream effects, quite literally, as it hits the water table, are predictable and devastating. The largest accumulation of Roundup in the world right now is at the end of the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River collects 85% of all the Roundup that we spray in this country into one water body. And as it goes down that last 90 miles of the Mississippi River, we see this decimation of water health. We now have a dead zone at the end of the Mississippi that's larger than the state of Rhode Island. The threatened zone of the ocean is larger than the state of Texas. And so we have this massive gap in biology at the end of the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico now. We have put millions and millions of fisheries, millions and millions of dollars of fisheries out of business as we've killed those fish populations. The ocean is now inhabitable to most of those species that were native there for millions of years. The response of nature to an event like that is actually algae blooms. And so we'll see an algae bloom as a response to injured water systems and lack of oxygen. And the algae is there to try to restart the carbon cycle. What we tend to do is then try to go kill that algae because it disrupts tourism and other things. And we're therefore undermining nature's own effort to re-equilibrate a very damaged system. That algae bloom that's happens every summer in the Gulf of Mexico grows every year. And last year it went exponential. And so for the very first time in recorded history, a single algae bloom went from the Gulf of Mexico at the mouth of the Mississippi all the way to the west coast of Africa. We've never seen that large of an algae bloom. That algae bloom is easily seen from space. So really fascinating to see that the scale of damage from this, agricultural, chemicalization has devastated not just human biology and the plants that we consume, making them more toxic to our bodies, as well as more imbalanced in their macronutrient delivery of things like sugar, fiber, protein, and the like.
Well, I never cease to be amazed by the arrogance of man. And it's like, we can conquer nature. There'll be no nasty effects. And of course, time and time again, and you went back through some of the history, and even prior to the advent of use of glyphosate, the organic and biodynamic farmers described this process. It was only made worse with the glyphosate because of the powerful chelating ability. We were already diminishing in mineral content. Now it's like, whatever's left, we're going to grab it, make sure you don't get it. Or if it comes into you again, you're not going to get the benefit of those minerals that chelated. You're going to get the damage from the glyphosate displacing things like glycine and weakening connective tissue. One of the things that you presented on, and this is something I lecture on all of the time as well, is that if you think that probiotics will correct this in your gut from an external source, you're kind of putting the cart before the horse, well before, maybe even more than that, because the home for the microbiome is as important, if not more important, than the microbiome itself, because it needs to live in an environment that is conducive for its healthy life and biodiversity. And so that's been a big part of your mission as mine. And that's why, appreciate and respect so much all the work you're doing, because that's going to make the biggest correction. Again, not only from the microcosm, but the macrocosm as well. Talk to us about how we restore your experience to the home of the microbiome, and watch how nature can provide for that reestablishment, even if we don't externally supplement.
Yeah, that's great input there. I think, the probiotic era, if you will, was an important step for mankind, in the sense that we finally started to embrace the possibility that there was such a thing as good bacteria. Previous to that, we saw all bacteria as the foe, and it's been, previous to that, it was the antibiotic warfare mentality against the microbiome. And so I do acknowledge that the probiotic movement was an important step forward, but my gosh, did we sure shoot ourselves in the foot with that approach. What is now evident, and the best studies done to date were just published in Cell, which is one of the most rigorous peer-reviewed science journals out there, in September of 2018. 2 trials, both in vitro, both a rodent model as well as a human trial, demonstrated the impact of probiotics versus fecal transplant versus a placebo on biodiversity of the gut. Mm-hmm. These studies looked at gut microbiome diversity after 2 weeks of antibiotics, and what they saw is about an 85% drop in the microbiome diversity over those 2 weeks of antibiotic, which is exactly what anybody would expect. What we didn't expect was the follow-up, and so they randomized into 3 groups at that point: 1 to fecal transplant by oral capsule stool that had been collected before the antibiotic exposure. And not surprisingly, in both humans and rodents, we saw a very rapid return to baseline within 20 days, 30 days. They were back to their normal baseline microbiome diversity. In contrast, if they were put on a probiotic, you can see that in the first couple of days, the gut microbiome starts to recover and then suppresses again to the same level of suppression that the antibiotic had caused. And that stayed flatlined for the rest of the study in the rodents, and that lasted about 40 days. And so there was no recovery of the microbiome, meaning the probiotic had just as powerful effect as the antibiotic to crush biodiversity. In the human study, they followed them out 6 months, and even at 6 months, the humans had not recovered microbiome diversity. Interestingly, in both studies, they did a placebo group. And the placebo in both mice and humans had fully recovered their microbiome with no input at 30 days. And we have a $42 billion probiotic industry now that needs to be replaced by nothing.
Well, and a lot of it, people don't realize, manufactured by pharmaceutical companies. The same companies that, are known for destroying the microbiome are coming in, patenting certain strains and putting a few in there. And so what does this say? That nature is so powerful that it can recorrect even the errors of man. Could we facilitate or accelerate that recovery? Now, I know that it can. You've done work with the Restore product, and I've worked with that, as well as the silver and the aloe, things like this that don't disrupt further microbiome replenishment, but restore the home, again, the terrain. How does this change our strategy moving forward?
Yeah, so, in full disclosure, this next part could be completely biased, in the sense that my science labs developed this product and brought that to market in 2014. But it was initially called Restore. Now it's Ion Biome as a whole product line. And the first supplement that we developed was for gut health. Second one that hit the market was for sinus health. And what we see with both those products is that these are now changing the terrain for the microbiome rather than manipulating the microbiome. And the terrain that you spoke of earlier is very, I think, apropos to the description or definition of gut health. Gut health is really based on 2 phenomena. Number 1 is biodiversity of the microbiome. And number 2 is the integrity of the gut lining as a barrier system. And that's not just like a brick wall barrier. That's an intelligent gatekeeper that opens and closes through something called tight junctions, which are like Velcro between the epithelial cells that create the massive gut surface that you have. Your intestinal lining has a surface area similar to 2 tennis courts in surface area. Compare that to like 1.5 square meters of skin surface area. And so we have massive exposure to the outside world through our gut lining. And the integrity of that gut lining is really the beginning of the immune system. And as you lose microbiome, we've shown this huge vulnerability to that gut leak, where you start to become very vulnerable to injury at that Velcro level of the gut. And we've further demonstrated that gluten as a natural component to many of the important grains and legumes and such is capable of injuring that tight junction gut permeability, especially if there's glyphosate in the site and bite of food. And so we published the synergy studies demonstrating that you could take a tiny bit of glyphosate and a tiny bit of gluten, put those together in a single introduction to the gut lining, and get 80% loss in the Velcro stability and get severe leaky gut. In that situation, we can add back the terrain. So there's no bacteria in these products. These are derived from fossil soils that are about 60 million years old. And that fossil soil is rich in these small carbon metabolites from the bacteria and fungi of the ecosystem of 60 million years ago, which is pertinent in time era because of the death of the topsoil that happened 55 million years ago, which led to the great extinction, last great extinction on the planet, which, of course, wiped out the dinosaurs, but also 85% of life on Earth. And so that great extinction, interestingly, happened over the death of the topsoil created by an asteroid or a huge volcanic event that left this layer of dust on top of the soil. And so it's interesting, again, if we back up to the beginning of this conversation, that we are engineering the same extinction event on the planet through death of the topsoil as we experienced 55 million years ago by an asteroid. And so there's all these movies now, about asteroids hitting the planet in the future. We are the asteroid hitting the planet right now. And we are literally devastating the ecosystem in exactly the same way that led to loss of life on Earth. There's been 5 major extinction events in the past. We're in the 6th now. We've lost about 40% or 50% of biology on Earth in the last 40 years. And so an astounding rate of loss. Many are now estimating that we're losing one species every 20 minutes to extinction. And that varies from the microbiome to the macro ecosystems, plant life, animal life, and beyond. We're currently on track to see, disappearance of large life, including humans on Earth, in the next 70 to 80 years, based on our soil reserves and the trajectory of collapse of global ecology. The largest extinction event that ever happened on the planet was 3 extinctions ago, as it stands, and that one occurred, wiped out an estimated 97% of life on Earth, because the death of the land-based ecosystem was so profound that the CO2 accumulation in the atmosphere was so rapid that the oceans had to take in that CO2, which acidified the oceans. And when the oceans acidify, you get complete collapse of all of life on Earth. And so left with 3% of life hundreds of millions of years ago that then recovered to support the dinosaurs, great extinction event, slow recovery to support, Homo sapiens and our appearance 200,000 years ago. And so this, interestingly, is a long time proven cycle on planet Earth, is if you devastate her soils, the oceans will acidify and you have collapse. And already today, with the recent, science coming out of Davos recently, we're now at an inevitable state of 2%. Or 2 degrees Celsius warming of the oceans by 2030. We can no longer evade that reality. The question will then happen, after we hit 2 degrees Celsius, will we be able to plateau there, or we continue to go up? The great extinction event happens around 4 degrees Celsius rise and acidification of the ocean. So, this is fascinating. That here we are talking about sugar, and in the topic of sugar, you have your pulse literally on health and life on planet Earth. And so I think it's important to kind of expand out sometimes so that we don't get sucked into the belief that chocolate's your problem or you just have a sugar addiction, to realize you are a biologic entity on planet Earth where biology is collapsing due to the lack of carbon cycling. And so this supplement line that we derived from soil is about carbon cycling, the terrain of carbon within the soil of your gut. Mm-hmm. Developed a sister product that is actually the other half of the soil extract. These are very large mineral deposits within the soil that we extract the human supplement line from. That leftover material ends up being the carbon content for the soil rehabilitation. And so we're rehabbing the soils that have been destroyed by glyphosate usage in pine forests, with the wood and paper pulp industry, or sugarcane, sugar beets being the leading two crops that demand decimation of their soil. And so it's interesting that the solution for human biology and soil biology is in carbon cycling and the literal terrain of the microbiome, rather than, like you said, trying to micromanage the microbiome and health is impossible. Biodiversity at the scale of 30 to 40,000 species of bacteria in your gut. We know that, you know, the larger macrobiotic situation is, you know, probably 100,000 species of bacteria, 5 million species of fungi, 300,000 species of parasites, 10 to the 31 viruses. And these numbers are so astronomical. And then if you look at the genomic content within those, we only have 20,000 genes. The bacterial microbiome has 1.5 billion genes. The fungal has 125 trillion genes. And so we are just vastly eclipsed on life on Earth when it comes to the genomic information, the protein intelligence, the enzyme intelligence of nature. We're just this little ditzel in biology on the planet, and yet we've come to dominate, you know, 97% of that environment with our own behavior, and that's to our own detriment, obviously.
I look at the microbiome and the macrobiome, so to speak, you know, the micro and the macro, try to find and learn from nature, observe it, duplicate it to the best of our ability, because if we think we can manage the hundreds of millions and trillions, it's like, again, arrogance knows no bounds, apparently. So it isn't so much, again, even replenishing the soils with bacteria outside of us as well, as much as it is restoring the home for the healthy microbiome. And then watch what nature does, that the terrain determines what grows there. This is, again, coming back to Antoine Béchamp. He was ignored. Claude Bernard, French physiology. These are the people I got to study later in my training as a homeopath that I'd never heard of growing up early. And most physicians don't know about this. And, you know, you're leading the charge as a physician as well to restore and retain the intelligence from nature herself, or nature's God, as we call it, creation. So if we talk about remediating internal and external, I'm not surprised, knowing what I know now, that the pattern has emerged that what we need to do is nearly identical, both internal and external.
Yeah, that's precisely it. And, you know, Antoine Béchamp, as you mentioned, was bickering, you know, in the academic environment for decades with Louis Pasteur. And of course, Louis Pasteur went on to win those arguments with the belief that germs were these things that were leaping out of nature to attack humanity, and we needed to be in this warfare mentality. And so, you know, of course, the name Pasteur would become the base for the practice of pasteurization, which is the heating of our food system. We heat the food product to sterilize it, and in so doing, we break the proteins. We, you know, as the beginning of processed foods is that sterilization process. And so, to the point that, you know, by the 1980s, we really had no living food left on the plate. We had completely phased out fermented foods from the American diet. The only fermented foods that people were eating were sauerkraut that had been heat pasteurized. You were getting no microbial intelligence out of that experience. And so we really left, you know, behind thousands of years of culinary intelligence and culinary wisdom for the, you know, convenience of the TV dinners and, you know, the frozen meals. That, you know, I'd say there's maybe a step in the right direction going, but it still concerns me that our wealthiest people on the planet are now eating pre-prepared meals from, you know, Whole Foods rather than a TV dinner. And maybe that's a step in the right direction, but my concern is that that individual is no more integrated into their food system than the TV dinner consumer. Mm-hmm. And much of our mission as a science group and in my education and everything else is not to tell people to start taking supplements. That we see that as a bridge. Like, we need to change the terrain for the soil. We need to change the terrain for the human gut. We can do that with supplementation, but we're never going to get to planetary survival if we don't actually fix the soil itself. And so we launched a nonprofit this year. Farmers Footprint was the first aspect of it. We have a complex, multifaceted organization, and the whole project is now called Project Biome. That launches in 2020. But farmersfootprint.us will get you to this nonprofit. And Farmers Footprint has been our educational mission to educate farmers and consumers on how to transition from chemical farming and chemical food systems to a regenerative agriculture, which is a large step past organic. When I set out with the mission to create this documentary film series and everything else, we thought we were going to try to convince everybody to eat organic. But unfortunately, on the very first, mission out to film, we happened into a soil health academy, and they were demonstrating soil samples from commercial chemical farms versus commercial organic farms. And it was devastating to see that the organic farms had worse soil quality than even the conventional chemical counterparts. The
Do you
realization
think that, Dr.
the
Bush,
US
if I can ask, do you think that's due to their lack of understanding of regenerative farming practices? I mean, obviously they're doing something better by not intoxicating the soils further, but is it good enough? I mean, does it go into things like Rudolf Steiner and anthropomorphic concepts, or where should we be leading the organic farmers, much less those that are in chemical agriculture, to transition beyond that?
Yeah, so the transition looks like stopping focusing on what not to do and starting to focus on what to do. And so the USDA, when it took over the organic certification, created a 30-step, 30 check boxes to become organic. And every one of those check boxes is basically what not to do. I'm not spraying this, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing this. But at no point in that 30 point does it mention soil quality or nutrient density of food. It doesn't actually mention the word nutrition anywhere. So it's not concerned about soil or nutrition. It's just, basically saying I'm not going to use these following chemicals. Of course, every organic, farm out there, for the large majority, will spray something, whether that's, BT or whatever, toxin they're using, and they kind of fit within this organic category. What they also tend to do, though, is they tend to over-till. Instead of spraying down the weeds, they'll just disc the whole farm up to wipe out the overgrowth of weeds or cover crop before they put in their row crop. And when they do the over-tilling, they disrupt the whole fungal network of the soil and kill the soil architecture. And so over-tilling tends to be even a worse outcome than overspraying. The path to success comes from around helping farmers and consumers start to demand that the attention be turned away from what not to do and turned away from food yield or product yield, and instead focus entirely on soil health. And so we teach farmers and consumers how to understand how to support the farmers who are making this dramatic transition from focusing on putting a crop in the ground to focusing on the ground itself. The exciting thing is that within a 3-year period, we can see the bottom line for farmers go up by 5x and 10x levels. These are farmers that are literally losing their farm, nearly bankrupt, going to profitability and sustainability within 3 years, and then within 5 years making more money than the history of the farm has ever made. And so the economic impact is where we're going to succeed this. We have found that over and over again, if you create short-term arguments for ecological health, you just can't win the game. You have to show an
economic benefit, of course.
Economic return.
Yeah.
So that economic return is real. And for that, we are very excited about the impact of this organization. And so we're bringing together all of the necessary pieces to make the consumer and the farmer alike aligned with, phasing out the chemical agriculture as a whole, and in the soil, remediation, soil vitality approach. Interestingly, one of the projects that we just rolled out, Non-Toxic Neighborhoods, is championed by Kim Conti, who started the program a few years ago in California, and we're scaling this up for much bigger impact in 2020. Turns out that the third largest crop in the United States behind corn, soybean, is actually lawn. And so grass is the third largest crop at 40 million acres across the United States, and it's one of the heaviest treated plants in the country. And so we have to clean up that 40 million acres as well. And so the Non-Toxic Neighborhoods has successfully gotten cities to ban Roundup in parks, playing fields, schoolyards, streetscapes, and the like. Big counties are committing: LA, Miami. The first was Irvine, California, with Kim Conti locally there. Now she's taking that. We got 60 counties underway now, and we hope to hit another 50 in 2020. So it's very exciting to see the possibility that while we're getting no movement on the federal level of regulation towards an intelligent approach to ecological management, we're getting huge buy-in at the local level. These local mayors and governors are recognizing the demand from their constituents to bring about scalable change in their communities to eliminate it, especially with this new recognition that Roundup really is causing cancer, especially in children and the like. There's this huge, mother and consumer demand now saying it's unacceptable that we're trying to kill weeds at the cost of killing children. And so we really have to change that fundamentally. So farmersfootprint.us can get you more information on all that.
Beautiful. Now, the irony, of course, of those that sincerely want to save, quote unquote, the planet, the environment, realize one day, just like we're discovering, that you can't, focus globally. You have to focus locally. That's the only thing that makes the change, and it incrementally changes and transforms as each environment is changed on a local level. The most local of environments is our own microbiome and the home for it. And by making better choices like you're talking about, and even adding up another local aspect to what you're discussing is, imagine how many what we call private gated communities, if you've ever been in those things, with the meticulous, immaculate lawns by design. They have to be, and they're spraying them all. Imagine if you could transform those gated communities into places where you'd be growing food instead of lawns as well. And if we talk about education of our children, more than even reading, writing, and arithmetic, I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, would be to teach children in every school in America and everywhere around the world regenerative farming practices, so that we each and every one of us become our own farmer as well, wherever we are locally.
I think you're spot on there. We're partnering with a number of groups, as well as some of our own team, with a K through 12 curriculum through Farmers Footprint there. We're really excited about that impact. We're seeing children so engaged and so interested in this topic. I feel like if this had rolled out when I was in elementary school, there would have been zero interest. But the spectrum of children that are just riveted by the opportunity to be out in the soil and watch a plant grow is really exciting. I think we're at a tipping point of youth energy and youth interest in this space. And so we do see that as a critical piece of the puzzle. I have shared a number of times, just keep saying it as often as possible in public, and the possibility that we can just manifest whatever we keep saying. But I think that a green core is critical, similar to the Peace Corps, where we subsidize education and experience in young people who would commit 2 years to working on regenerative farm projects around the world and really bringing regenerative practices. I think, almost most importantly, after we get the U.S. moving in the right direction, the developing world, because the developing world has an opportunity to, stop the damage before it gets as severe as it has in the United States. And right now, Brazil is the #1 consumer of Roundup, glyphosate products. And so we're just decimating, the Amazon jungle and everything else now with this chemical. And, I sometimes give up hope when we see the rate of decimation of the Brazilian jungle and through Ecuador and stuff. But, I keep holding out hope that we could, stop this bleeding before it gets to the same extent that we've done in the States. So it's going to take an all-out effort. I think, anybody listening, you can get overwhelmed with the stats and the situation, but I want to that we all showed up right now. It's interesting that 7.5 billion human souls have shown up right now to be part of this human experiment right now, which I think is beautiful. I think for the amount of insanity that we have practiced on the planet, it is our path. This was the path that we needed to do whatever it is we're going to do as a species. And if that's to go extinct in the next 100 years, I can actually deal with that on some level. I'm a hospice doctor, and I've seen over and over again that my hospice patients in those last couple weeks of life have some of the most profound experiences, transformational experiences, deep, uncovering of wisdom within themselves and perspectives on the world at large. So if that's what we need as a species, as a hospice event to bring us to a higher level of consciousness, I can accept that. But I can't, help but hope that we might be one of those hospice patients that as soon as we stop all of our medications, we suddenly rebound and get healthier. We go on a different trajectory of life. And so I hope as we come off our pharmaceutical dependence in this hospice state of our species, we have a reawakening, realizing, oh my God, I don't know why we dumped all those toxins on ourselves through our pharmaceuticals in the doctor's office, all the way to our chemical agriculture for the last 100 years. That was a stupid chapter. We, co-create with Mother Earth now and live a completely different course. And so I don't want to diminish the fact that we needed the journey that we've had. Now the opportunity to rise. And so the exciting thing about this summit and everything that comes close to doing what you guys are doing is the more people that are resonating with this message of we could literally change not just the human food system, literally the planet Earth's biology by re-engaging with the soil. And you mentioned the importance of local. The most local you can go is your backyard. And so learning how to garden without the chemicals, learning to get rid of that Roundup out of there to stop spraying the dandelions, which happen to be one of the most potent anti-cancer foods on the planet,
Mm-hmm.
and the like. And so kind of really getting engaged in your own yard. If you don't have a yard and you're in an apartment, it's amazing what you can do with these little vertical garden systems now on a patio, whatnot. You can grow enough food for 4 people on a 4x4 vertical garden. So really impressive, capacity for production as each family on the planet. If we look back to 1945 at the end of World War II, some 40% of the food system was being produced in our backyard victory gardens. And so we don't have to go back to some Neanderthal state to remember when we were providing. It's like we have done this in our generational memory. And so we can go back to that reality where we're producing alongside of our farmers the food that we would consume.
I talked about the reinitialization of that concept, and I call them Liberty Gardens. If you want to be free from the fear, even, of a very dark reality that we do acknowledge if we do not alter course. At the same time, Dr. Zach Bush, what you're offering, which is so exciting to me, which makes me smile every time I connect with you and talk with you, is a way to direct the anger that many people feel, or maybe it's the despair, but whatever emotion is that we might perceive it to be negative can be used positively. And if you direct those energetic emotions into, like what you said, your backyard, and you begin to grow, or with the Farmer's Footprint project that you've got going on, there is a genuine transformation. Now you don't feel powerless. You are empowered to transform, despite all of the naysayers and the negativity and the Hegelian dialectic being played out in media and governments around the world. We can just say, y'all have your fun if that's what you want. We're just going to go about helping to repair that which is, it knows what to do. Partly we got to get out of the way, and partly we also, got to engage in mimicking or doing what nature has been trying to teach us since there's been nature and humans and animals on it and in it.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Yeah, I remain optimistic most days. I have moments of collapse of that hope, but
we all do. I mean, that's part of our human experience.
Yeah, that's part of the human journey, I think. But when I sit with farmers or I sit with a consumer group, I was keynoting just a couple of days ago at Acres USA in a very frozen Minneapolis up there, and to see 1,000 farmers traveling in from all over the world to get together to celebrate the capacity of regenerative farming, it's such a joy. And Australia is way ahead of the United States in this area. Australia's regenerative movement is 30 years strong. It's just kicking butt over there. So in the same way, I see the opportunity for Canada to transform before the United States. And so the peer pressure between these nations is important, but I would like to see the United States really regain food independence. We completely lost it in 2019 with the seeing Monsanto sell itself to Bayer was an unbelievable. I couldn't believe that an isolationist, president that we have, who's been really isolation tactics for trade around the world, allowed a German company to buy a U.S. asset that grows 85 to 90% of our staple crops. Like, that should be illegal to allow the U.S. government or to have the U.S. government allow a private interest in Germany to own our food system at that level.
Dr. Bush, the only thing I hope is that it's a karmic retribution for what Bayer did, and continues to do in terms of poisoning the planet in their own way, that they would collapse themselves by doing it. But at the same time, as I said, we have got, and you acknowledge this, and I appreciate you so much for doing so. Again, it's where we started. The sugar addiction or whatever it is a small but important symptom of everything else that has gone wrong, how we've corrupted the soils, how we've ignored nature, tried to conquer nature rather than live with it, learn from it, and honor it, and make manifest the part of nature that we also are. I have to say, I just look forward every time. We don't connect enough, I know, with all that you're as busy as you are, but that you would take some time here with us on the Get Off Your Sugar Summit to really expand the worldview, as well as bringing it back down to our own backyard and our own microbiome. I can't say thanks enough.
Awesome. And for those of you who are really tuned in and kind of like, where the hell did that conversation go? Yeah. If you're confused as to how this all ties into sugar after all of that, we've tied it in a couple times, but what I would say is that you're experiencing a biologic impulse for sugar consumption because of the microbiome. So we imprint a nutrient bias on our microbiome that then biases our human behavior to reinforce that microbiome. And so our bacteria can compel us to eat the way we do because they need survival. So if we grow up a monoculture of bacteria that thrive on sugars, they're going to keep informing our brain that we need more sugar. And we've shown that we can take the bacteria of obese adults who are sugar addicted and put those into mice with no allowance for more caloric intake. Those mice are obese within a month. And so we've really been able to show beyond a shadow of a doubt that the microbiome is imprinting human behavior and metabolism at this level. And so when you find yourself craving, I want you to not think that this is some personal weakness or some character flaw or some, grounds for, self-doubt or self-loathing. This is simply a symptom of a collapse of ecology within your body. And if you back out into the garden, and if gardening seems like a way too ridiculous of a stretch, if you just grow a mint plant in your window, mint has such an, indelible quality to it. It's almost impossible to kill. So if you're a brown thumb, try the mint. But when you put a mint leaf on your tongue, it will satiate much of what you were looking for with the sugar high that you were going on. And so let nature start to adapt that microbiome and your macro behaviors through just a little touch of nature, and you might be amazed at what happens.
That's a beautiful way to wrap this up, Dr. Zach Bush. We could spend days talking. I'll never run out of things to chat with you about, and love and appreciate you so much for the work that you're doing. And once again, you can learn more about Dr. Zach Bush at zachbushmd.com. It'll lead to a lot of these other sites, including social media that you outreach through many different channels, and the Ion Biome products, as well as Farmer's Footprint, which I hope everybody begins to engage in, whether you're a farmer or not. My name is Robert Scott Bell. I want to thank you on behalf of Dr. Daryl Joffrey on the Get Off Your Sugar Summit. We have links as well to Instagram and Facebook, as well as the website. And I will just wrap it up this way. As I say on my radio show, 2 hours a day, 6 days a week at robertscottbell.com. The power to heal is yours. And that includes the power to heal your microbiome and your lawns when you convert it to real food growing microbiomes. All right, Dr. Zach Bush, thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate you. Thank you all for listening.